Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. We're going to be talking about something that's especially relevant for those of you gearing up for the UPSC exams.
Yeah, we're going to be taking a close look at India's startup scene, how it stacks up against a major player like China.
You got it. We're not just talking business trends here. This is about getting a good grasp on where India stands in terms of its economy and technology.
Absolutely. Crucial stuff for your mains and even for prelims, to be honest.
So today we're going to dig deep into this comparison that Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal brought up. It was in a recent Indian Express article. He had some really interesting observations about the different paths that Indian and Chinese startups seem to be taking.
Right, and it's not just about understanding the differences. It's about what these choices mean for India's growth down the line. What should we be focusing on for the future? That's what we're going to unpack today.
Exactly. And we'll keep it clear, concise, and relevant to your exam prep, I promise.
Yeah.
No getting lost in the weeds. All right, so let's jump right in. What was this core difference that Goyal was highlighting? What's the big picture here?
Well, it seems to boil down to where these startups are putting their energy and their money. Like in India, we see a big focus on those online delivery services.
Oh yeah, the food delivery apps.
Exactly. And then those super fast grocery apps as well.
Right, like Blinkit and Zepto.
Yeah, those are good examples. And of course, we can't forget about the influencer market and fantasy sports. Those are huge in India right now.
They really are. And it makes sense in a way. We've seen a lot more people getting access to the internet and more disposable income in urban areas.
Right, that definitely plays a role. And look, a lot of these companies have really taken off, right? We're talking about companies like Flipkart, Zomato, Swiggy. They've gone public.
Yeah, they've reached a whole new level.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Minister Goyal raised a really interesting question, and it's a crucial one for us to think about as well. He basically asked whether this current focus, on these consumer-facing services is really tapping into India's full potential.
That's a good point. Are we truly innovating in a way that will have a lasting impact, or are we kind of just meeting those immediate consumer needs?
Exactly. And that's where the comparison with China gets really interesting.
Yeah, because over there, it's a whole different ballgame.
Right. According to the Indian Express article, Chinese startups are really pushing the boundaries in sectors like electric vehicles.
EVs, yeah, and the battery technology that goes with them, which is super important.
And we can't forget about semiconductors.
Oh, absolutely. Semiconductors are the building blocks of all our tech.
Exactly. Plus, they're making strides in artificial intelligence, robotics, and even logistics. They're really investing in those foundational technologies that will shape the future.
It's a very strategic approach. It looks like they're aiming for self-reliance and even global leadership in these key areas, and that's where the issue of intellectual property, IP, becomes so critical.
Oh yeah, that's a big one.
The article really stresses that India needs to step up its game when it comes to developing its own IP, creating original technology in these cutting-edge sectors. Right now, we're lagging behind China, and that's something we need to address if we want to be competitive on the global stage.
I mean, it's not like there aren't any efforts being made. The government has launched initiatives like the DLI scheme, specifically for the semiconductor industry.
Right, the design-linked incentive scheme.
Exactly. And that's definitely a positive step. But the reality is we have a lot of catching up to do, especially in areas like electric mobility. It's kind of eye-opening when you see how much India relies on Chinese innovation in EVs and battery tech.
It really is. The article even points out that China is surpassing Western companies in these fields. And then you have the AI scene. We often hear about those big American AI companies, but in China, they've got DeepSeek, and they're showing that they can develop powerful AI models, potentially even more cost-effectively. India doesn't really have a comparable AI model that can compete at that global level yet.
Yeah, that's a pretty significant difference. And, speaking of global reach, India has done a great job in building these massive e-commerce platforms, but they're primarily serving the domestic market.
Right, and there's a bit of a catch there because, real spending power in India is concentrated in maybe the top 10% of the population. So that kind of puts a limit on how much these companies can grow within India.
And it makes it harder to expand globally, especially when you've got those established international giants to compete with.
Absolutely. It raises a big question about whether we're creating companies that can truly hold their own on a global scale. When you look at China, they've got companies like TikTok, Shein, Alibaba, they've become global brands.
Yeah, huge global successes. And it's not just about the digital world either. China's still the king when it comes to manufacturing tech.
Yeah, even though India has made progress in assembling smartphones, we're still pretty reliant on Chinese components.
It's a work in progress for sure. There are efforts to ramp up domestic manufacturing, but it's a long road.
It is, and this is where the whole concept of deep tech comes in. The Indian Express article throws out a pretty striking number. China has over 6,000 deep tech companies.
Wow, that's a lot. Just to clarify for our listeners, what exactly does deep tech mean?
Deep tech is all about those startups that are using really advanced science or engineering breakthroughs. We're talking AI, biotech, quantum computing, robotics, even aerospace and clean energy. It's about tackling those really complex, high-impact problems.
So not just incremental improvements, but game-changing innovations.
Exactly. And to give you an idea of how mature their deep tech ecosystem is, over 100 Chinese deep tech companies have already had successful IPOs. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, no kidding. But the picture for Indian deep tech startups seems pretty different.
Yeah, unfortunately, they're facing a real funding crunch. Investors see them as higher risk, so it's harder for them to get the capital they need to grow and compete globally.
It's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, isn't it? Without enough funding, it's hard to prove yourself, which makes investors even more hesitant.
Exactly. It's a cycle that can be tough to break. But hey, it's not all doom and gloom. India does have a strong presence in the SaaS sector, software as a service.
Oh, right, with companies like Zoho and Freshworks.
Yeah, and even those big players like TCS and Infosys, they've made a real impact globally.
That's true. But the article makes an interesting point about this. It says that a lot of our SaaS success has been driven by cost advantages, not necessarily because we're breaking new ground with completely novel innovations.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then there are those global capability centers, the GCCs.
Right.
They do innovate, but it's often very specific to what their parent companies need. So while SaaS is definitely a strength for India, the nature of the innovation in that sector is something to think about.
Yeah, it's a nuanced picture. So we've got success in SaaS, but maybe not the same kind of deep tech focus that we see in China. But hold on, there is one area where India has truly shown, and it's something we should be really proud of.
I know you say UPI.
You got it. UPI, the Unified Payments Interface. It's a game changer.
It really is. It's become a global example of what's possible with digital payments. It's amazing how it started as a government initiative and then opened up to private players like PhonePe and Paytm.
And it's had a huge impact on how people in India transact. Other countries are even looking at it as a model.
It's a real testament to India's innovative capabilities, but there is a challenge.
Yeah, the article mentions the monetization issue. Because UPI is mostly free for users, the companies providing the service are constantly trying to figure out how to make it financially sustainable.
It's a tough balancing act, for sure. Now, it's important to present a balanced view here. The Indian Express article also includes some perspectives from startup leaders themselves, and they make a compelling case. They emphasize the positive contributions of companies like Zepto.
Right. What are some of their points?
Well, they talk about the jobs created, a massive 1.5 lakh jobs, and the tax revenue generated, over 1,000 crore annually. Plus, they've attracted over $1 billion in foreign direct investment. They even call it an Indian innovation miracle.
That's a strong statement.
It is. And their argument is that maintaining this high growth rate should be the priority. They're saying, don't criticize entrepreneurs too soon. Let them build momentum.
They make a fair point.
They also draw a parallel with China. They point out that even China started with a focus on consumer services before shifting towards deep tech. It's an interesting historical perspective.
It is. It shows that different stages of development might call for different approaches.
And when it comes to deep tech, these leaders acknowledge that there is potential in India. But they emphasize the need for better funding and a more supportive ecosystem to really nurture those high-risk, high-reward ventures.
So it's not a lack of talent or ideas. It's about creating the right conditions for those ideas to flourish.
Exactly. And that brings us back to that central question, what kind of innovation should India prioritize? How do we strike a balance between building on our successes in consumer tech and fostering the growth of strategic deep technologies?
Yeah, it's a question that goes to the heart of India's future in a rapidly changing global landscape.
So just to wrap things up for our listeners, especially those prepping for the UPSC, here's what we've covered today. We've seen a clear difference in focus between Indian and Chinese startups. India is leaning towards consumer tech, while China is heavily invested in deep tech.
Right.
India has definitely proven its strength in building domestic consumer platforms and making a mark in the sauce sector. But there's that question of the nature of innovation in sauce, and then there's the gap in IP creation and the funding challenges for deep tech in India.
All crucial points.
And of course, there's this ongoing debate about how we define and prioritize innovation in the Indian context. It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
But for our listeners who are gearing up for those important exams, think about the implications of these trends. How will they shape India's technological progress, our journey toward economic self-reliance, and our place in the world?
That's exactly right. These are interconnected issues that are at the heart of understanding India's economic and technological landscape. So here's one final thought to leave you with. India has a huge demographic advantage and a vibrant entrepreneurial spirit. How do we channel that energy to boost innovation in those crucial deep tech sectors without losing ground in the areas where we're already strong? It's a challenge, but it's one we need to tackle head-on.
Couldn't agree more. We encourage all of you to delve deeper into this topic. Look at government policies, how investments are evolving, and the overall innovation ecosystem in India. It's all incredibly relevant to your exam preparation.
Absolutely. And if you found this deep dive helpful, hit that like button and subscribe for more in-depth discussions on topics that matter for the UPSC. We want to hear from you, so drop your questions and thoughts in the comments below.
And don't forget to check out the original article in the Indian Express for a more detailed look at this issue.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. See you next time.